Hi, Lucy. It's Laura. Can you turn me on channel 2 for grief support group?
Okay.
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to Grief Support Group this afternoon. It's good that you're here. I am glad that you've taken the time. I'm not sure that it's coming through, so if it is, give me a moment. I'm sorry for the interruption here. The computer looks like it's doing something weird. So anyway, it is good that you're here. And regardless, Okay. Thanks for your patience there. This is a time for us to just take a moment to be together, to be intentional about the grief journey. This is a thing that probably is with you. If you're here, my guess is that your grief is something that you carry with you all the time in sort of different ways, and it maybe feels more or less heavy, or maybe it feels you have different emotions that accompany it, but my guess is that it's probably pretty present to you a lot of the time. Or maybe it's not so present, but it's something that you want to kind of check in on. Like you might take care of your physical health by checking your blood pressure every so often or something like that. It's good to take a little time to be intentional, a little time away. So the way that we do this group is that I read a chapter from a book. We're reading right now Finding Hope and Healing, which is the third book in the series Journeying Through Grief. It's written by Kenneth Hawk, who is the founder of Stevens Ministries. Some of you may have heard of that. It's just a little book with short little chapters. And so I'll read a chapter and then maybe pose a question or two for you to reflect on. You may want to have a journal with you. You may find it helpful to draw or write. One of the things that we would be doing if we were together is sharing with one another, both sharing in taking care of one another and in noticing what's going on for each other, but also sharing experiences, because expression is an important thing, so that grief doesn't get stuck. Grief can be very difficult whether you're expressing or not, but if you find ways to express, sometimes things have an easier time flowing through you. So I would encourage you to find some way to express. Maybe that's writing, maybe that's talking with somebody. I also want to say, make sure that you're taking care of yourself, particularly your physical body in this time. So as we begin, I want you to settle into your seat, do whatever it takes to find a comfortable posture, and take a couple of deep breaths to take a look and ask yourself where you are in your grief journey, either today, right now, this moment, or maybe what's your grief journey been like in this past week. So take a couple of deep breaths and some time to do that. Okay, this chapter is chapter 5 in this book, and it's called Dealing with Anger. Most people tell me they expected to feel sad about their loss. The emotion many people say surprised them the most was anger. Not everyone experiences anger during grief, but many do in some way and at some point. Feeling angry, even to the point of rage, is quite common. After all, someone you love has been taken away. Who wouldn't be angry about that? Anger likes to hide, be buried or covered up, so sometimes we're not even aware it's there. But anger that's stuffed away won't remain hidden forever. When it breaks out, it may catch you by surprise. Possible targets of anger. Knowing whom or what you're angry with will help you deal with the anger. I've learned that grieving people can be angry at many different people or things. Death itself, or the illness that took the one we love, those we might feel are responsible for the death, medical personnel or hospitals, family members and friends for what they said or did, especially if we think they let us or our loved one down. Circumstances such as job responsibilities or airline delays that may have prevented us from spending time with our loved one before he or she died. People who may seem to be free of suffering. Perhaps the three most common targets of our anger are our loved one who died, ourselves, and God. These are also the areas of anger that can cause us the most heartache, guilt, confusion, and anxiety. Here's a quote by Philip Yancey. One bold message in the book of Job is that you can say anything to God. Throw at him your grief, your anger, your doubt, your bitterness, your betrayal, your disappointment. He can absorb them all. Anger at the one who died. A grieving wife told me, I was mad at my husband for leaving me. I'd think, why did you do this to me? Then I'd think, he didn't leave, he died. But I was incredibly angry anyway. A father said, I felt angry for a long time before I realized I was really angry at my son. He was behind the wheel. He was the one who was speeding. But he was also the one who died. I felt terrible for being so angry at him. Anger at ourselves. A woman said, my anger started as guilt because of a big argument with my son the day he was killed. My guilt turned into anger, and because I kept it all inside, it began to poison my soul. A husband became furious at himself for not taking his wife to the hospital sooner. Guilt can quickly turn to anger at ourselves and add to the pain we feel. Anger at God. It's very common to become angry at God. How could God let this happen? Why wasn't God there? Why does God allow suffering? People are often afraid of this anger because they're afraid God will punish them. They worry that others will think they're awful for feeling this way. So people hold in their anger toward God or are ashamed to tell anyone about it. I want to assure you, as a pastor, psychologist, and someone who's been there myself, it's perfectly okay to be angry with God. In the entire universe, God is the only one able to absorb your anger. Scream at God if you'd like. That's what many of the writers of the Psalms in the Bible did. No matter how hard you beat against God's chest, God's loving arms are waiting to embrace you. How to deal with your anger. Anger is a tough emotion to deal with, but you can learn to deal with your anger so that it doesn't tie you up in knots. If you have anger lurking below the surface, bring it out of hiding and let yourself feel your anger. When you do that, it will begin to lose its grip on you. Getting good and angry can be good for you and help you grieve. Recognize your anger. Name your anger even if it doesn't make sense. Almost everyone gets angry at something or someone or something at some point in their grief. Recognizing your anger and the target of your anger is an important first step in rendering it harmless. Here's a quote by Nancy Groves. Sharing my anger with God gives me a listener who accepts me where I am and who tells me he can handle it. Accept your anger. Anger is a normal response to loss. Too often we're told that anger is always wrong or even sinful. Anger is a very natural human emotion, just like happiness, fear, or excitement. Accept your anger even if it seems irrational. I know a man whose mother died of a heart attack while his parents were on vacation in Montana. For a long time, he was angry at the entire state of Montana. He knew perfectly well this made no sense at all, but that didn't stop him from feeling angry. Express your anger. Unexpressed anger can build up until it erupts. Anger that we keep bottled up can even cause health problems. Find ways to let your anger out so that it won't injure you or others. One good way is by talking or writing about your anger. Another good way is by sharing your anger with a healing person, someone who can handle it. Recognizing, accepting, and expressing anger can be a very healing experience. I know a man who took a lot of verbal abuse from his father growing up. When his father died, the man had a difficult time dealing with his pent-up anger. Finally, he wrote a long letter to his father describing all his painful memories and angry feelings. He went to his father's grave and read the letter aloud. He felt self-conscious at first, but soon his emotions took over and he was able to get his anger out. As he knelt at his father's grave, the tears flowed, and years of hurt and anger were washed away. So the question you might want to reflect on is, what has been your experience with anger in the midst of your grief journey? And what does it take, or what would it take, to recognize your anger, accept it, and express it? How might you do those things? We'll take a few moments for reflection. The next chapter is chapter 6, titled Letting Go of Guilt. All the way through, as we read these things, keep trying to check in with your body and noticing if you need anything. If sometimes these things can be a bit intense, and so take care of yourself. If you need to step away, or you need to stay with a particular question that you're journaling about, if you need to go get a glass of water or some tissues, please feel full permission to do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Letting go of guilt. At a conference, I asked people whether they had experienced any guilt during their grief. Nearly everyone there said that at some point in their grief, they had struggled with guilt over something, and the reasons for their guilt covered a wide range. Some blamed themselves for somehow having caused or not prevented the death. Many deeply regretted words they'd said or deeds they'd done while the person was still alive. Those who had to make difficult medical choices for their loved ones sometimes second-guessed their decisions. Many felt guilty about certain feelings such as anger, relief, apathy, or even moments of happiness or laughter. Some had struggled with guilt for being angry at God, having doubts, or other spiritual issues. Grief provides fertile ground for guilt, but there are some facts you should know. Guilt is often irrational. We may blame ourselves, often without knowing it, in ways that make no sense. On his first day on a new job as a truck driver, one man made a delivery to a funeral home. The next day, his grandfather died and was taken to the same funeral home. The man was convinced he'd caused his grandfather's death, saying, if I hadn't taken the job and made the delivery to that funeral home, he'd still be alive. Guilt is often buried inside. It can take the subtle form of what ifs, should haves, and if onlys. One woman discovered she was blaming herself for her sister's fatal heart attack. I'm a nurse. I should have seen the warning signs, she said. If only I had paid more attention, I could have stopped it from happening. Here's a quote from Martha Whitmore Hickman. I am not perfect. I am loved. Guilt often arises out of unrealistic expectations. A single mom who worked full-time had a daughter who died. As she struggled with the loss, she felt incredibly guilty for not having more patience with her other children or with her own mother, who was in a nursing home. Despite her own grief and the many responsibilities she was bearing, she still expected herself to be the perfect mother and daughter. Guilt can distort the facts. We can become so aware of our own shortcomings that we forget our loved ones' imperfections. A man told me how he took all the blame on himself for not working harder to restore his relationship with his father before he died. It took a while for him to recognize that his father hadn't made much effort toward reconciliation either. Guilt is usually over things we cannot change. After a loved one dies, we can't undo the things we said or did. A woman told me how much she wishes she could change her actions the night her mother died. She wanted me to come over that evening, but I wanted to go out with friends. We argued about it, and I hung up on her. That was my last chance to be with her, and I wasn't there. Here's a quote from Desmond Tutu. What a tremendous relief to discover that we don't need to do anything to prove ourselves to God. Guilt is only supposed to be a temporary emotion, a warning signal alerting us that something may be wrong and may need to be corrected. Guilt isn't designed to be permanent. Feeling guilty on an ongoing basis becomes a terrible burden. It can weigh us down and keep us from experiencing the healing God wants for us. Here are ways we can let go of guilt. Identify and admit your guilt. Just like anger, guilt is most dangerous when we don't realize it's there. Identifying what we feel guilty about often helps us see how harsh we are toward ourselves. Talk about your guilt. A man who lost his twin brother to a congenital disease told me, for a long time I kept asking myself, why him and not me? Then I found a friend who let me talk and talk and talk. I asked my questions and got out my pain. I still don't know why and probably never will, but I was able to let go of the guilt that I was alive and my brother wasn't. Write about your guilt. If you find it too difficult to talk about your guilt, try writing about it instead. Write letters to your loved one or to God, or write to yourself in a journal. Say why you feel responsible. Describe what bothers you most. Sometimes putting your guilt into words on a piece of paper can help you identify and let go of it. Here's a quote by Henry Nouwen. God does not require a pure heart before embracing us. Recognize I'm perfect, and so was your loved one. You both made mistakes and did things you regret. That doesn't make you a terrible person. It simply makes you human. Forgive yourself. God's forgiveness sets us free from guilt. Even though God forgives us, sometimes we may have difficulty forgiving ourselves, which can block our ability to feel the healing power of God's forgiveness. If you're having a hard time forgiving yourself, see if some of the suggestions in this chapter work for you. You might also find it helpful to talk to a pastor or trusted Christian friend who can listen and offer God's forgiveness. Here's a quote by John Newton. It's the song Amazing Grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Pray the Serenity Prayer. This simple prayer, written by Reinhold Niebuhr, is a good way to ask God's help in giving you some perspective on your guilt. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. View your guilt as someone else might. It may be helpful to look at yourself as if you were a third person. You may see how unrealistic your expectations are. If you wouldn't blame another person, why are you blaming yourself? If you'd have compassion on another person who's grieving, why wouldn't you have compassion on yourself? This is a Laura Stone side note. In addition to viewing your guilt as a good friend might, thinking, what would my good friend say about this? Or what would I say to a good friend who told me this? Another thing you can sometimes do, it depends on your relationship with the person that you lost, but you can maybe imagine what they might say if they were standing in front of you and you said, I feel guilty for this. What might that person say to you? Back to the book. Remember the good that you did. If we become preoccupied with guilt, we end up dwelling only on the negative things we did. Take a fresh look at your relationship with your loved one and recognize the good things you did as well. Commend yourself for those. Embrace the living. John Claypool, a pastor and author who lost his daughter to leukemia, talks about turning if-onlys into next times. If you are struggling with guilt over things you wish you had said to or done for your loved one, say or do those things to your loved ones who are still living. Reach out to family members, friends, and others. Give yourself a second chance to do the things you wish you had done differently. Letting go of guilt is a key to your healing. A woman whose young son was killed in a playground accident told me, even though I hadn't caused his death, I blamed myself for the longest time. Then I met a friend who listened. She let me talk about my guilt, but never judged me or corrected me. She's the one who finally helped my healing begin. I experienced God's forgiveness and was able to forgive myself. We got started a little bit late, so I'm not going to read another chapter, but I do want to give us a little bit of time for reflection on that last chapter there. The question here is, what has been or what is your experience currently with guilt in the midst of your grief? And what might you need to let go of or transform that guilt? How is your guilt asking to be engaged? As we close our time together, check in with yourself and see what you need. If you're needing to stay in this space a little longer, give yourself permission to do that. If you feel like this is enough for today, but you really valued this time and feel like it could be a good anchor for you, maybe find a time other than Monday afternoons to spend your own intentional time. As you transition into the rest of today, maybe think a little bit about what you want to carry with you into the rest of the day, and do some sort of transition activity. Maybe seek someone out to talk to, or stretch, do a little bit of exercise, go on a walk, whatever it is you need to transition into the rest of your day. I think this is especially, I take so much time on this in this group because I think grief is an especially physical, has physical effects, and it's an especially physical experience in addition to being emotional and spiritual. And so sometimes the things that are best for us in the midst of grief, they aren't the easiest things to do. So we have to be more intentional sometimes. So thank you very much for joining. Or I should say, instead of thank you, I should say, I'm very glad that you took the time to join today. As always, if you would like to talk, please give me a call and let me know. If you would like this book or other books in this series, or other books about grief, I've just started a new library in the chapel foyer. There will be more about it in the Timberline, but one of the things that it has there are books about grief. They are books that I've used, read, found helpful, that other people who have experienced grief have also found helpful. So feel free to borrow from that library. If there's more than one copy of a book, go ahead and take it. If you'd like to give a donation to Timbercrest in lieu of it, you're welcome to at the front desk. But you certainly, or you can give that donation to me. But you don't need to. If there's more than one copy of a book, you can take the book, use it for as long as you feel like it's helpful, return it if you like, or keep it or pass it on. If there's just the one copy and you'd like your own copy, talk to me about it. If there's just the one copy, go ahead and borrow, but do bring it back. Okay, I think that's all that I have to say. You all are in my prayers, and I don't know how many there are listening to this, but I do know that there are many of you out there that are going through a grief journey of some sort or another. So connect with each other, reach out to each other. Okay? Blessings in your week. I will see you here with this activity next Monday at 3:30, if you like.